Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Tim O'Brien. He's going to share some stories about his friendship with John Prine.
But I want to say how I met John Prine, which is having known Steve a little bit. There was Prine at the Edmonton Folk Festival. He's backstage hanging around with members of the band. It was, as it existed at that point, Rick Danko and Garth Hudson and I think Richard Manuel were there. Anyway, so they're all hanging around, and I got the gumption up to go up to John Prine and say, hey, I'm a friend of Steve Goodman's. I said, I just wanted to say I really love your music. And Steve, I know you were really close to Steve, and we missed Steve. It was only a year or two after he had died. And Prine said, Steve is doing really good. He's got a new record out, and he just won a Grammy or something, He said, don't worry about Steve. But that's how I met John, and he was just like an old shoe. He's like a regular guy. It was disarming that way because he's kind of a songwriting god, an American icon of the arts, and he's really easy access, and it's just like you got to swallow hard to not kind of fawn all over the guy because you don't want to ruin it, I didn't want to press myself on him or anything, but I, always check in with him. So, but then he was a fan. He was always aware of what you were doing, and he was always following the music. And Hot Rise was on a reunion tour, I think 2014 or something, and maybe a little after that. And we played at the Station Inn, and I look over there. Here's Prine sitting on the last seat in the house on the far left, He said, I've never seen you guys. I always wanted to see you. And he actually, snuck in the back door and sat right down there and watched the whole show. It's, makes you feel good. But, I got to participate on a couple recordings. One was when he made a duet project with Mac Wiseman. And Mac was another guy that I knew, I'd go to Earl Scruggs' house for his birthday parties, and all these guys would be there, including Mac. Or maybe Lester Armistead's Country Store. He had a place up in Goodlettsville that was kind of like an old store, and have jam sessions up there, and all the Scruggs and Mac Wiseman, Jim and Jesse, they'd all be up there. So I knew Mac, and so then my buddy Dave Ferguson, was producing this record with John and Mac. And they had a little table, like almost like a little dinner table, and they'd put these desk stands, microphone stands on them, like a little disc with the thing, and then it's just like this tall. So they're sitting there with the lyrics in front of them, singing, facing each other, with two mics, and then the band, be close around them playing. So I got to play guitar on 2 or 3 songs, and then. Later, when he was doing a second version of the In Spite of Ourselves, whatever the duets with female artists, Kathy Mattea is another associate that I've worked with over the years and been helped greatly by. And she was recording a duet. And one of them was Dreaming My Dreams of You by Alan Reynolds. Or is it by Alan Reynolds, or we're in Alan's studio recording his song, and Kathy and I. Anyway, I'm looking through the glass at the two of them. They're in the same isolation booth singing on the same mic, I think. And I actually have a little short video clip of them singing, warming up, snuck that. John, he loved all the old music, I saw him. What's great about Prine is when I moved to Nashville, I would take the kids, my sons are all grown now, but at the time in 96 and 7, they were in just starting grade school and just starting high school. They're 8 years apart. And so I'd go drop them off at their school. And then oftentimes I'd go, if I had a grocery shop, I'd do that then. And so, it's like 8:15 in the morning. I'm going up to the egg aisle, and there's Prine. And that's the thing. He's the guy you'd see in the egg aisle.
Did you see him at Meetin' Threes around town?
Yeah. You'd see him at down here at the Copper Kettle, which is the closest one to my house, and he'd signed on the wall, Meat Loaf Wednesday, John Prine, and then at Arnold's for sure. And then when he had a record release for that second duets record, and he took everybody out to eat at Arnold's. That was great. Yeah, I would have loved to cook for him. I invited him over here, and as Fiona said, they wanted to come over here sometime, but they just never. I would have a picking party on January 1st a number of years, and it was kind of open house. It got a little wild after a while, but they threatened to come by, but never did. The Jim Rooney and the Irregular shows were always great because whoever it was Rooney's a friend of Rooney, that's a wide palette there. They would come by and he might get them up on stage. And John Prine was definitely a regular participant there. And, he'd get up and play a song. He might play like My Bucket's Got a Hole in It, and then he might do one of his songs. But the first time I saw that happen was the Hodam family. That was like a once-a-year gig. They were, I think they played at a place called the Box Seat. And it was over in Green Hills, like a little bar. And they just started at, 5 in the afternoon and went till midnight. It was just like this long jam. And it was like about 15 people on stage. And they're all really highly qualified and ultra tasteful. It seemed like, and that's what the Irregulars gigs are like. It would be all these great musicians, could have been A-team players like Dave Pomeroy and, Dan Dugmore and Pete Wozner and all these players. And it was way too many people to make sense. And yet it sounded perfect because they were so ultra tasteful. I remember going to the Station Inn and going, man, whoever's mixing this gig is a genius, because how can you do this? And then I looked at the soundboard. There's nobody there. And Richard Bailey played banjo with him every time, and he was the guy that set it up. He said, yeah, we don't need to mix stuff. People know, they're mixing, people playing on mics and pianos coming through directs, but they're just geniuses themselves. The musicians here, you come to Nashville, and a guy described it to me. He said, you run around a track around your hometown, think you're doing pretty good, make a pretty good time. Come to Nashville and you realize, man, you got to up your game a lot, People are lapping you all the time. So it really is true. You learn about timing because you just have to. You learn about taste and dynamics, It's a lesson. It's a hard lesson to learn. Those are supreme lessons, though, and Nashville is contagious. You've got to learn or give it up. One of the great shows I saw was at the Romp Festival up in Owensboro, Kentucky. They had them on a Saturday night, and I'd play with my group, and then everybody stayed around to hear John. And it's just like, I don't know, that was really great to hear him in Kentucky, kind of nearby where he's from, really. It's just one county away, I think. Muhlenberg County, that's like a pretty heavy-duty place. He knew about, his parents knew about his relatives, aunts, and everybody knew about Bill Monroe and Merle Travis and all that being around there. His great aunt or something said, we always thought Bill Monroe and Charlie Monroe were like Mafia guys or something, because they'd come around in these big cars and fancy suits, coming back to Rosine, Kentucky. What the heck are these guys into now? At that same festival up there at Romp, there was a security guard named Mark Schultz, black man, and I think he was a deputy sheriff, or maybe he was a policeman in the county or whatever. And somebody said, oh, this is Arnold Schultz's grandnephew or something. And Arnold Schultz is a guy that played with Bill Monroe's Uncle Pen and with Bill Monroe and taught him how to play rhythm guitar. He taught this guy Mose Rager how to play guitar, and Mose taught Ike Everly and Merle Travis. I mean, the guy's Arnold Schultz is like the unsung father of country music that we don't know about. We know about D. Ford Bailey being a black man. He was an early star of the Opry and so influential, but we don't know so much about Arnold Schultz. There's no recordings of him, but you can feel the reverberations of his influence through these people, the Everly Brothers, Bill Monroe, every bluegrass thing, every Chet Atkins lick you hear. It's really kind of comes from this guy. And he was a railroad worker that was itinerant. Apparently would go oft times to New Orleans during the winter months. When he came back in the spring, they said you could hear him through the woods. He'd be walking around with his guitar just playing as he went. And you knew he was back in town. So that's pretty cool. And Bill said he played dances with him, and they'd, come home at sunup. They'd break the dance up at sunup and ride home on their horses. But anyway, so he met this guy, Mark Schultz. And I said, well, so what do you know about your uncle Arnold? He said, well, my grandfather and him had a band, and my grandfather kept his band going. And he showed me a picture of them, and they had drums and guitar and I think piano. So they probably played dances and stuff. And he said, well, I said, well, where is he buried? And he said, he's down in Rosine, which is where Bill Monroe's from. He said he's at the graveyard on the other side of the tracks. I said, well, okay. After the festival, the next day, my wife Jan and I went down there to find his grave. So we go to Rosine. It's really funny because we're trying to find this other graveyard. I've been to the graveyard where Bill and Charlie Monroe are and their parents, brothers and sisters, but there didn't seem to be any other graveyards. So we're kind of leaving, and we see this woman on the side of the road. She's got on her bathrobe, and she looks like to be about 80 years old, and she's got a cigarette, and she's in her bathrobe out by the street. And we stopped and asked her, said, do you know where the other, maybe the African-American graveyard is? She said, oh, there's no African-American graveyard here. There's only the one up here on the hill. And that led to a discussion of, I said, well, I see Bill Monroe up there. She said, oh, Bill Monroe. Everybody pays so much attention to Bill Monroe, but we have these people that died in the wars, and they don't give them any kind of big sign or anything, And so we talked to her, and she had the cigarette, the ash is about that long. She's just taking it real slow and telling us all this stuff about the little town. So we figured, what the heck, this is not the right place for Arnold's grave. So then we go and look, there's this thing called the internet. We looked it up on the internet after we got back to where there was service, because Rosine has no cell phone service for AT&T, apparently. So then we find out it's in Morganton, Kentucky. So we drive over there, and there's an African-American graveyard, and it's just no markers, just rocks, just little, rocks about this big marking graves. And but somebody had put up a memorial, a nice, quite a large stone sculpture with, a tribute to Arnold and how he started this thumb-picking style that's so popular in Kentucky. And Arnold Schultz he's a great enigma. And, it's telling that his grandnephew didn't realize, he thought he was buried in Rosine. He knew where Rosine was. That's interesting to me, because he knows where Rosine is. He knows that Bill Monroe's from there, and he knows that there's that connection. So he just assumes he's buried there, but he's not. I think at first I heard that Fiona was sick with COVID, and then found out that she got better, and he got diagnosed, and then he went in the hospital. They were over in Europe and coming back, and got back home, and she was real sick, and then he followed her in the hospital and died. So I don't know how I found out. I think I found out just by the internet somehow, real quick in the morning. It was real early on in the pandemic, mid-April or something. And it's like, okay, this is real. We're losing people right and left, and there's no sense to it. There's no, right and wrong about this. They shouldn't be taking John Prine, but he's just as vulnerable as anybody. And even though the world should be protecting somebody like John Prine from any kind of danger, we're all vulnerable to this. And but it was just so tragic. It's like, this is somebody I knew, somebody who had encouraged me, somebody who personally encouraged me, but also just the very nature of his music and the fact that it was there was encouraging. Just somebody like that to pass, it's like, oh, this is really one of the great tragedies of our time that we're facing here. And it's going to be worse before it gets better than it was.